4, 3, 2.
Hi, my name is Shayla Ring, and my topic is sexual harassment in sex ed. My research question is, to what extent is our current curriculum effectively teaching sexual harassment? I chose this topic before the Me Too campaign, which caused widespread awareness of sexual harassment in nearly every facet of the workforce across America. Before Me Too, even then, I knew that sexual harassment was a serious issue, pervasive in our society that affected multiple men and women. The explosion of the movement known as the Me Too campaign split Hollywood wide open. Men in high positions who had misused their power for far too long finally began to face the consequences of their actions. #MeToo, started by civil rights activist Tarana Burke to build solidarity among young survivors of harassment and assault, gained immediate traction after tweeted by actress Alyssa Milano. In less than 12 hours, more than 30,000 had used Me Too. In less than a week, the phrase had been translated to fit a global audience, adapting into Yo Tambien, Ana Kaman, and many others. From Me Too came Time's Up, a movement aimed at ending sexual assault, harassment, and inequality in the workplace. Time magazine's 2017 Person of the Year award was won by a group known as the Silence Breakers. Dozens of women, including Tarana Burke and Alyssa Milano, who had kept the secrets of their abusers. Dozens of women who had been stunned into silence for far too long. With millions of personal stories shared and more coming forward each day, #MeToo, #Time's Up, and the Silence Breakers have put a spotlight on an issue that will no longer be swept under the rug. These movements have caused a chain reaction of support and empowerment for those who have suffered at the hands of their abusers for far too long. According to the Rape, Incest, and Abuse National Network, or RAINN for short, an individual in the US is sexually assaulted every 98 seconds. According to Professor Poco Kernsmith, PhD in social welfare at Wayne State University, 46% of girls and 36% of boys are sexually assaulted before they reach the age of 18. Sexual harassment, also referred to as sexual assault, is defined by the U.S. Department of Justice as any type of sexual contact or behavior that occurs without the explicit consent of the recipient. Examples of sexual harassment have been listed by the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and they include rape, forced kissing or touching, and even offensive comments about one's gender. These are the factors that psychologists have recognized as common factors in victims of sexual harassment. These factors do not justify sexual harassment, but rather give insight into their perpetrators. Amy Cass of Violence and Victims found that individuals who regularly used recreational drugs increased their exposure to violent victimization. In many cases, these drugs were used to lower the inhibitions of victims while also emboldening their perpetrators. On college campuses, joining in a sorority or fraternity also increased the chance of victimization. Cass found that 25%, 1 in 4 of sorority girls have been victims of attempted rape, while 17% have been victims of completed rape. I would like to reiterate that exhibiting these factors do not guarantee that a victim will be sexually assaulted, nor do they make sexual assault the fault of the victim if they are exhibiting these factors. Megan Strain, Jericho Hockett, and Donald Saucier of Violence and Victims found attitudes associated with rape culture to be indicative of a future sexual harassment. Rape culture is defined as rape-supportive psychosocial environments which increase the risk of sexual violence. Marshall University found examples of rape culture to be misogynistic language, objectification of women's bodies, and the glamorization of sexual violence. Mark Schneider of the Canadian Journal of Human Sexuality found that assault thrived in male-dominated social contexts. In these social contexts, it was found that men commonly will not confront each other for their sexist comments. This context has been referred to by President Trump as locker room talk. A mild-mannered kid with a good heart in a terrible, terrible situation are the words Tommy Cope used to describe Brock Turner during the People versus Turner trial of 2016. Turner was found guilty of 3 felony counts of sexual assault after witnesses found him assaulting the body of an unconscious woman behind a dumpster at a frat party. Despite his conviction, despite multiple witnesses and text evidence proving the rape, Turner was sentenced to 6 months of jail time. According to Ring and the US criminal justice system, out of 1,000 rapes, only 6 rapists will be sent to jail. Even without the horrifyingly unfair outcomes of sexual harassment trials, there are additional factors that shun victims of sexual harassment into silence. As addressed previously, attitudes present in rape culture often blame the victim of sexual assault while exonerating the abuser. Millions of individuals that use the #MeToo hashtag describe slut-shaming by doctors, questions about their outfits by the police, and friends and family who refuse to take their side. The unjust handling of such situations sends a message to harassment victims everywhere that we have decided not to listen. The results of this survey are what initially drew me to this topic. Planned Parenthood surveyed over 2,000 men and women ages 18 to 95, and on average, women had a better understanding of sexual consent than men. Additionally, 88% of participants supported teaching consent in schools, with 93% supporting teaching how to recognize sexual consent. This led me to ask if nearly 2,000 individuals support teaching basic sexual harassment education, is this topic being taught in schools at all? When interviewing Dr. Adam Swinyard, Chief Academic Officer at Spokane Public Schools, he admitted that while sexual psychologists recommend 15 classes being devoted to sex ed, Spokane Schools only devotes 4. Furthermore, when examining the guidelines of teaching sex ed in Spokane schools, neither consent nor the causes of sexual harassment were mentioned in the curriculum. Dr. Swinyard stated that even if consent is not directly mentioned, the topic of healthy sexual relationships are addressed. When examining the sex ed curriculum at Shayla Park High School, I found that sexual harassment was taught as a mini unit towards the very end of the semester when taking a health class. I decided to administer a survey to my fellow students at Shayla Park High School. The purpose of my survey was to determine how students are taught information about sexual harassment at the high school level. This was done by examining what students can recall learning about the topic and to determine the perspective of students on how effectively they are being taught this topic. I had 71 total students respond to my survey. The gender and grade level of these students were not limited. My survey was administered to students currently taking a health class or taking a gym class, as it is required to complete a gym and health class within the same year, or at least before graduation. This way, I could ensure that at some point, all the students that had taken my survey had taken a health class. There were 11 total questions in my survey. The first 4 questions were diagnostic to determine the age, gender, and current class of the respondents. Questions 5 through 7 determined the perspective of students on what they had learned about sexual harassment. The students were given a specific statement asking them if they could recall information, if they were given enough time, and if they were given enough information on the topic. Oh yeah, and if they could recall specific information. Their responses were on a scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Question 8 of the survey determines how long students can recall learning about this topic, and questions 9 and 10 require students to pull from their own knowledge about what they have learned in class about the topic. They were asked to define and to give additional information about sexual harassment. The last question, question 11, asks where students have learned about sexual harassment outside of school. Before I go into my results, participants were grouped based on how recently they had taken a health class. Group A were students that were currently taking a health class. Group B were students who had taken a health class 1 semester prior. And Group C were students who had taken health 1 year or more prior. Group A had 23 total participants, 65% of which were female, 35% of which were male, 92% freshmen, 4% sophomores, and 4% juniors. Group B had 24 participants, 63% female, 29% male, 8 preferred not to disclose their gender, 75% freshmen, and 25% sophomores. Group C had 24 participants, 29% female, 71% male, 75% of which were sophomores, 8% juniors, and 17% seniors. Because Group A had not yet reached the sexual harassment mini-unit, they were used as a control group to show how well students could define sexual harassment before learning it at the high school level and where they received their information. As such, only questions 9 and 11 could be answered honestly given their knowledge level. NS in the data refers to not taken seriously. When asked to define sexual harassment, 61% of students could give a correct definition, 35% could not give a definition, and 4% did not answer seriously. When asked where they learned the topic, 38% said social media, 32% said from a parent, 21% said from a friend, and 9% said other. Responses initially answered with a strongly agree, to disagree, to strongly disagree scale were lumped together for a clearer look at the data. So strongly agree and agree now fall into the agree category, with strongly disagree and disagree falling into the disagree category. 83% of Group B agreed that they could recall significant information on sexual harassment, while 17% disagreed. Group C, however, were evenly split 50-50 on whether or not they could recall significant information. 70% of Group B agreed that they were given enough information on sexual harassment, while 30% disagreed. 58% of Group C agreed, with 42% disagreeing. When asked to, 63% of Group B agreed that enough time was given to the topic, 37% disagreed. While in Group C, 42% of Group C agreed that enough time was given to the topic, with 58% disagreeing. When asked to provide a definition for sexual harassment, 79% of Group B were able to define sexual harassment correctly. 8% could not, and 13% did not take the question seriously. 63% of Group B were able to define sexual harassment, 8% could not, and 29% did not take the question seriously. When asked to list additional information, 54% of Group B could, 42% could not, and 4% did not take the question seriously. Only 25% of Group C could provide additional information, 50% could not, and the remaining 25% did not take the question seriously. When asked where else they had learned about this topic, 43% of Group B said social media, 37% said from a parent, 17% said from a friend, and 5% did not answer. 39% of Group C answered from social media, another 39% said from a parent, 17% said from a friend, and 5% did not answer. The majority of all participants, regardless of which group they were in, could give an accurate definition of sexual harassment. In response to nearly every question, Group C was more split than Group B. However, many more participants in Group C did not take the survey seriously, which skews the validity of their data. The responses from Group B and C showed that the majority of students felt overall that their curriculum was effective in teaching sexual harassment. Furthermore, the majority of responses indicated that social media was where most students learned about sexual harassment outside of school. While many students could give a correct definition of sexual assault, less could recall additional information, including examples. One clear limitation in my data that I expected going into it was that many students at the high school level would not take the questions seriously. As such, I was surprised that many of the respondents in Group C did not take it seriously, as they were made up mostly of upperclassmen, which was discouraging. Another limitation to the validity of my data was that when I was administering it, I could see that many students were copying the answers from their friends, which also skews the validity of my data as it was not their own thinking. However, this data led me to conclude that sexual harassment is taught in schools, even effectively by the standards of high school students, but the information that is being taught is after the fact. This is a complex, pervasive issue in our culture, and addressing the definition without acknowledging the causes and roots of the issue will do as much for our society as placing a bandage over a gaping wound. When sexual harassment is taught in schools, every aspect of the issue needs to be taught as well, including rape jokes, including rape culture, including male entitlement. When students first begin sex ed, there needs to be twice as much information provided which teaches them the importance of consent and healthy boundaries as there is information as to what sex is. Furthermore, areas of law enforcement, such as the judges and cops that do not take sexual assault allegations seriously, need to be held accountable for their actions. There is no justice for victims when there is no punishment for their abusers. This is an issue that has gone on for far too long without any hopes of change, and the time is up.
Shayla, what was the most important source of information you found while conducting your research, and why do you think it was important?
I think one of the most important sources was from the Rape, Abuse, and Incest National Network, because it was a hotline monitored or just where information was given from across the nation. And so I felt that it was very reliable in terms of giving me data about sexual assault.
What was the fundamental argument or idea in your research? And then, how does this argument or idea relate to the purpose of your research?
One of the fundamental arguments is that while we are teaching sexual assault, what we are teaching is a definition that applies only after the fact, and that we are not teaching what causes sexual assault, what to look for, and even how to present or prevent these behaviors from happening. And in society, it's not being acknowledged either. There's more there's more of an awareness as to what sexual harassment is than to what examples are and to what causes it and how to rid our society of these issues.
Shayla, if you had 3 more months to work on this research question, what additional research strategies would you put into practice?
I would find more evidence about current sex ed curriculums. When I was looking through this, there were very limited sources that actually helped me define what an effective sexual curriculum was in this context. So I would definitely use the time I had to find more examples of that.
Great job.